So, Ramell and Maceo, welcome. So, quick introductions. I mean, we called this New Ways of Seeing, which is maybe a rather grand title, because what we're really talking about, what we really want to talk about is, the act of filmmaking. And I should also say this panel is kindly sponsored by Canon, and we have Matthew Yates from Canon in the audience, and he's going to be contributing a bit from the floor, and will as a product manager, is that the right phrase? Yeah. So product manager for Canon, working on the video and the cinema products, and Canon is, as I say, part of the festival is setting up this afternoon, I think, in Cutler's Hall. And from tomorrow, you can go out and come and check out some of the latest Canon gear. I think that's what we've got for you there, and that'll be until the end of the festival at the end of Tuesday. So, two filmmakers. I'm going to introduce first Ramell Ross, an artist based in Rhode Island and in Alabama. Won the 2016 Aaron Siskin Photographers Grant and a Rhode Island Foundation McColl Visual Artists Fellowship. That's quite a long thing to put on the card.
It's absurdly long. I don't know why they did that.
It's a really long one. You're also a Mellon Gateway Fellow. I'm not sure what that is, at Brown University. Where's Brown University?
It's in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island,
yeah.
Okay. And a Sundance Art of Non-Fiction Fellow. And indeed, you've made a big impact this year with the film Hale County this evening, which won a special jury award for creative vision at this year's Sundance. I really like that award. Creative vision is a really good award to win, I think. And you're getting theatrical distribution this year on the film in the US and I'm sure elsewhere. As well as being now an award-winning filmmaker, Rimmel is a photographer and I think working particularly with large format cameras, plate cameras, is that right?
Yeah, sheet.
Yeah, that's right, plate cameras. And you're also a basketball coach, or you have been a basketball coach. I don't know if you're doing that at the moment. So the film is being shown this evening in the showroom cinema at 6:15, and you're, I think, going to be doing a Q&A for that. And then also on Monday at 9:30, and I think there's also a Q&A there. So now on my right, Maceo Frost is from Sweden. I haven't actually written down where. Did you say Stockholm?
Stockholm, Sweden, yeah.
There you go, in Sweden. So you're from Sweden. You've made a film about a boxer called Namibia in Cuba. Sounds as if you're collecting countries. So I wanted to welcome you to God's own country, which is what they call Yorkshire, the county of Yorkshire up here.
I feel welcome.
Yeah, good. Well, your film is called Too Beautiful, Our Right to Fight. It was shown yesterday evening, and some of you may have seen it or gone along to the party afterwards, the reception afterwards in the Tampa Sellers Wheel. Good Cuban-themed party, and Namibia was there as well, wasn't she? Sheffield is a famous boxing city, as I don't know if you know, but there's a trainer called Brendan Ingle who's trained some of the great British fighters, particularly from the north of England. So anyway, I hope you're all, you and Namibia are kind of feeling at home.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Good. So what we're going to do in this session, we're going to cover these two guys' work. We're going to look at their approach. We're going to find out in detail what they use and why they use it. And I really do want to hear from the audience, and we will make sure to have time for questions. And if you want to ask questions during the session, please stick your hand up, and there's a volunteer. There's a couple of volunteers with mics in the orange t-shirts, and they'll bring a mic to you because we want these to be conversations. So please do come up. Please do be thinking about questions. So first, I want to turn to Maceo. This is a film that grew out of a short film that you started doing, I think, and then it it grew into a longer term thing where you were filming over 2 years. Is that
Actually,
right?
yeah, over a course of 3.5, 4-ish years. I keep referring to it as accidentally making a feature in a way, because we started as a short, became a little bit longer. We're like, damn, okay, we need more footage. Okay, let's turn it into, now it's 35 minutes. Let's make it 45. We go back and like, fuck. Now it's 1.5 hour long. now we need to make it shorter. So it's like, it kind of grew really natural, which was good, you know. I think that's sometimes the best ways to do it as, you know, a first time documentary feature filmmaker. So, yeah.
And set up the. We're going to see a clip in a minute, because I think that's the best way to get a sense of your cinematographic style. You shot some of the film, and then Lionel Cabrera was the DOP, wasn't he? Just briefly set up, where are we, and who is Namibia?
Cool. Okay, we're in Havana, Cuba. Namibia is one of the best boxers there is in Cuba. However, boxing for women is banned in Cuba, so she's not allowed to compete, and she's been training every day 5 hours for the past 10 years. I mean, my producer in Cuba, my line producer, introduced me to her, and they practice together, and he's just like, you have to meet this woman. She keeps kicking my ass every day in the gym. So that's kind of like how we got introduced, and yeah.
Okay. Great. So a really exhilarating clip and brilliantly edited, I thought. Anders, was it?
Andreas Arvidsson edited it.
Yeah, fantastic editor. And the shooting is so fluid and dynamic. What were you filming on?
We were filming on a Blackmagic pocket camera.
So how big is a Blackmagic for those who don't have it?
It's
That
big,
sort of size?
yeah, probably big as a phone, maybe even smaller in a way. But it was really nice to have that small camera, because especially at this place where we were filming, we weren't allowed to film there at all, actually. And because this gym that was set up was, they set that gym up in secret without any governmental support. So we kind of just sneaked in, and one of the head coaches was like, okay, you get 10 minutes to shoot. And eventually we wound up being there for 1 hour. And we tried to actually get back in after that. We never got back in again. So it was this one-time moment. Wow. And having that little camera kind of enabled us to not make too much a big of a deal out of it. Of course, we're 3 guys from Sweden in there, but
you stand out.
But at least it's not that that big rig, that's what we're sneaking around a little bit. Yeah.
And so you said, I mean, the Blackmagic, I've sort of lusted after Blackmagic cameras, I'm afraid. Sorry, Matthew, Canons are good too. But I've looked after, I've lusted a little after Blackmagic because of their size. But I mean, if they're that size for the unit, they're not as thin.
Yeah, okay,
what's
the lenses.
Lens on top of it? What sort of lenses?
So this lens was actually an old Nikon zoom lens that I got from, I think my mom found it in a market in the 70s or something. And I mean, it was nice because I kind of like when there's old lenses, it gives this sort of character to the footage, whereas sometimes when you use new lenses, it just becomes so sharp, and you lose some, or at least for me, you lose some sort of personality in the shots.
And so most of that was being shot by Lionel, was it, or did you both have cameras? Were you covering, if you were only there for a short period, were you sort of covering all that action in the gym? Yeah, so
Lionel was shooting on the Blackmagic, and I was running around with my 16mm camera shooting.
So a real mix of shooting formats and lenses all melded together. Yeah, you also spoke a bit about, when we spoke on the phone, you spoke about needing a camera that could capture the particular colours and textures, or you were looking, you were very conscious of what Cuba was as a place and how it looked in choosing what you would do. Just explain, what you would use. Just explain that a bit more.
Yeah, okay, so you'll probably see it more in the next clip when we're more like in outside situations. But what I found really interesting, and you can do it with a lot of cameras, is that you can, because the sun is so strong, and there's a so strong sun is super, the contrast is really heavy, from the sun to the shadows. So what we did was we noticed with the camera, if we underexposed it, so there's never any highlights that's blown out. You just lift the blacks, and you get this like grainy sort of feeling that kind of mimics 16 millimeter, and that just looked really nice. Like I tried to do it in Sweden, it doesn't work. So you have to do it where there's like lots of colors and textures, and that's kind of the thought process behind this. And when we discovered that, we're like, wow! Like I felt like a kid again. I was like, okay. It was really fun shooting it.
Because I think you said to me for the first month you were in Cuba, you didn't actually film anything. You just walked around taking photographs.
The first week, yeah. So actually before I went there on a vacation, and I met Namibia like for second week. The first week I was just walking around taking portraits of people and taking video portraits of people, which actually later wound up in the film.
Okay. I think what we'll do is we will move on to Ramell first, and then I want to come back to you a little bit later. Is that okay?
Cool.
So, Ramell, your film, I think, is certainly has got a different pace to the to what we've just seen there, but. This is you also have a very much a photographic background, as I said, and this is your debut feature. Can you talk about how you see the difference between photography and film, and how you got into photography? Because I think that's got quite an interesting beginning of how you got into the whole craft of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, we all know that photography and film are, one's like the child of the other. Cinema is sort of, in some sense, slave to photography. But to me, the bigger difference is the way in which, someone uses the moment. When you take a photograph, at least from my perspective, coming from like a sort of conceptual, sociological perspective, you try to put as much as possible in like one single frame. So this frame becomes the site of this entire universe you're creating, or this all this meaning that you're imbuing. But when you're shooting with the cinema camera, you obviously add time to it. And what happens is that you're sort of using this moment to prove the next moment, to prove the next moment, to prove the next moment. And what happens in that process is that, at least in my perspective, in some sense, each frame loses its potential to speak to the sort of, magnificence or the grandiosity of the single moment in some sense. And so it's, that time-based.
Because I saw something you wrote about that you started getting into photography after, or really getting into photography after your mother fell ill, I think you said. And you said in an interview I read that the questions around this illness, they found agency in the refuge of the camera. And he said, in these moments, my Pentax K1000, which is a SLR, film camera, stills camera, was a genie bottle machine, an otherworldly contraption capable of catalyzing hope, which I thought was really interesting. That for you, the camera was almost a bit of a sort of tool to capture your mother in a way that you wanted to see her.
Yeah, well, it was sort of almost less about capturing, my mother, and more about, having the power to control one's visual destiny or to control one's destiny. And so, obviously everyone knows that it's basically one of the most powerful tools of language in the world. And so, you get to go out and you get to choose the future of your vision. You get to choose what meaning is. You get to make your own sense of the world. And so, coming from, moments in which, you know, the person who raised you is no longer able to, or is, you know, kind of dying, and you don't have control over that, to be able to have a tool that gives you power in some sense, specifically as a young one, when you're like really sort of emotionally unstable, more so than when you're grown up. For most, at least, some go the other way. But
and I believe it happened in Northern Ireland. Is that right? You were in Northern Ireland for a while, and somebody, did you say an ESPN photographer or somebody, a news photographer, encouraged you to take pictures? I'm glad to hear that the UK had a small part to play in that. And that you then moved on to making photographs in Alabama, as I say, with a large format one. We've got some of those, a few of those stills here. If we can just show some of those. So just talk a little bit about those photographs and then how you moved on from these photographs into making a film in the same place.
Yeah, well, so, you know, I don't show this. The only time I show this photo is during like an artist talk. It's not like, you know, what I, you know, choose to say that my worldview of photography is, perhaps. But the reason why I think this is important for this conversation is that, you know, this is taken with a sort of 4x5 instant camera. And I was taking photos of some of my students with this camera, and there became this really huge issue in that, you know, I would take an image of them, which I thought was really, you know, potent or, you know, spoke to their personality, but it was this wild reduction of their reality and this wild reduction of their personality. There were so many different facets of it. And so I needed to find a way to sort of undermine that sort of totality that photography offers often, which is, you know, you look into it and you're like, oh, look at this person. I can like sense their humanity, or I can sense X, Y, and Z, when you're just projecting onto them and they're sort of, in some sense, only a fracture of themselves. And so what I asked them to do was to write one adjective or one word that described them on the photo. And that was just sort of strategically a way to switch the power dynamic and the agency, and to sort of, you know, give them a little voice, and then to sort of see myself or my view of them in the background.
And so you took these photographs, and then it was, would you say it was like a natural progression to move into film after that? Did that seem like the right thing to then move on to?
Yeah, because, you know, photographs, while they're, you know, incredibly powerful and influential, et cetera, they just don't, like, you know, sort of hold consciousness the same way that time does. And so to be able to like carry someone's consciousness or something is a pretty powerful way to speak or to express.
So I think let's now look at the first clip, and do you want to talk a little bit? Maybe let's see the film. Let's see the clip, and then you can tell us who the people are in it. So if you can play the first of Ramell's clips, please. You've talked before about active looking and conscious making. Tell us who the characters are in that clip, or the main characters. I think you focus on two in the film, don't you? And is that how it is? Is it them actively looking at the camera and you consciously making images of them? Is that the way around to understand that?
Well, that quote is specifically talking about the sort of maker and a person sort of in the world. It wasn't intentionally talking about the sort of relationship between quote unquote viewed and viewer. But I think it applies. It would take a lot of time to sort of unpack the ideas behind that. But in this film, or in this clip, that was Daniel Collins, one of the protagonists, and then the other one, his name is Quincy Bryant. But I think what is happening here, it's a little bit sort of, the film is like such a sort of roving and rambling sort of montage that like, you know, jumps in and out of people's lives and deals with imagery in interesting ways. The film is sort of made up of visual movements and sort of has an orchestral form as opposed to a narrative arc and a sort of 3-act structure. So what you're seeing here is, you know, you sort of move through the town in some way, and then all of a sudden a character or a protagonist emerges out of that, and then it falls into a visual movement, and then another person emerges from their sort of world or that's created in a sort of sort of natural way. So this is, while indicative of the film, it's very much not indicative of the film. Okay. You know what I mean? Just wanted to clarify, yeah. Like that's, watching that like out of context is always really strange. Sure. Because, yeah, although,
No, you need to see the whole film. And the camera you used was a DSLR, wasn't it? It was a Canon.
It was a Canon. It was a Canon. And I would love, a couple free ones, multiple free ones,
Give them out.
Just hand them to my friends, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a Canon. It was a Canon 5D, is that right?
Yeah, Mark III.
So the classic documentarian's tool in a way, but coming from a large format camera on a tripod, with a plate. I mean, if people don't know what a plate camera is, it's the one where you put a hood over you, and then it's a film plate, and you slide it in, and you press the shutter, it takes one picture, and then you take it out, take it off to be developed.
And what's most bizarre about that is that, the image comes in backwards and upside down. Yeah. That's like what slows it really down. So
going from that to a portable camera that's, very portable, that sort of size, what did that feel like? And I got the feeling that a lot was happening in front of your camera.
Yeah, I love that you're like being gestural with it, because that's sort of what the Mark III allows you to do, is it allows you to like attach it to your body, and then become in some sense an extension of your eye, and then in a greater, more fluid sense, a sort of extension of consciousness. And if you're, you don't have a big rig, if you can keep the camera really small, and keep the mic small and keep the lens small, and you sort of really practice using it as an extension of your eye, then you're able to like sort of cross the sort of boundaries from like pointing at things to like sort of ingesting them and observing them in the way in which you more naturally would.
I mean, Maceo, was that also your experience of filming in Cuba? And I don't know how good your Spanish is and how you could communicate sort of verbally with everybody around you. Did you feel that by having a small camera and being in amongst everybody, you were talking to them in a different way than if you had a big rig?
No, actually not.
Interesting.
I think we do it pretty much the same if it's bigger or smaller. I mean, if you have a super big and it's 35mm film, then we don't just spray. Then it's a little bit more difficult. So yes, in a way, it's smaller. You can be quicker and you can run around and shoot things more. You can roll around in the dirt, you can get under a corner. So in that sense, yes, but yeah, it depends a little bit on.
And in terms of the relationship with the characters, I mean, Namibia is present in the film pretty much all the way through, isn't she? Did she just kind of forget about being filmed because of the way you were operating?
Surprisingly, like she's been extremely easy to film, and I think you notice it with some people just don't, they're not affected at all when the camera's in their face, and with some people the camera's there, you see that they change a little bit and they need more time, so it depends on the person. But Namibia, she was just super confident, and she didn't really nothing really happened when we put the camera up. She just kept doing whatever she was doing, which was, that's the dream for a documentary filmmaker. Yeah. Okay.
I actually wanted to bring in Matthew, because I meant to bring you in slightly earlier, actually, but if there's a mic. I just wanted to go back to this question of lenses and lens choice, because it's very interesting what Maceo was saying earlier about using vintage lenses. He said Nichols from the 70s and 80s. I've got a couple of them as well. And is that something that people are looking to, that particularly in the documentary world, they're looking for a different look than the high-end lenses that you and Nikon do? And have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that we're seeing a definite trend towards kind of older glass. I think modern lenses are very good. The optical quality is very good. They resolve very well. But with kind of this increase in resolution, almost things can be too sharp. And people are trying to differentiate and also kind of period match their lenses. So if you're you're doing something based on a historical documentary, then filming with a modern lens doesn't quite look right. And this kind of differentiation, occurs at all levels. And it's actually just optical flaws. It's optical flaws that the engineers have designed out in terms of flare and aberration, and also the coatings can have some effect on color. But it's all this kind of trying to differentiate yourself from other productions, from other mediums, and crucially from smartphones.
I saw it. I saw a line somewhere that said that lenses are the new film stock. Back in my day, you'd choose different film stock, or if you're working on film now, you can still do that, to use different film stock or different type, different brands of film for your photography. And now with digital, the opportunity is only there through choosing different lenses if you want to originate something. Is that right?
Yeah, so you would pick your lenses and you do your tests before you shoot, because there's a certain look you're trying to achieve, and once you've picked your glass, you're stuck with that look in the same way of film. Yes, you can grade, and yes, you can shoot in high bit rates and log, etc. But the lens has an intrinsic component to the image, and ultimately it matters.
Thank you. Did you, Ramell? Because we talked about the camera, but I don't know what lenses you use and whether there was sort of conscious choices about what kinds of lenses you were using, or the angle, I guess, the angle of view that you wanted in the film.
Yeah, definitely. As a huge Canon fan. So big. I just can't. I really wish I had time to express the grandness of my relationship between Canon. Sorry. And so, yeah, no, actually, I really I've shot with digital Nikons, digital Canons, Leicas, blah 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 blah. The only one I've owned was actually I owned a D80, a Nikon D80, and then I moved to Canon just because I think its baseline output is, and I'm not joking in this one, although I wasn't joking as much as anyway. It's kind of perfect. Like I shot it at its standard, and it renders colors well. I think I wasn't shooting raw, so I think the dynamic range could have been a little bit better if I was, but it renders really deep shadows. It's really contrasty, and I think that it's really important to bring the contemporary aesthetic, the contemporary visual world to the historic South, which is traditionally shot with an older sort of Instagram filtery thing, which sort of relates to the way in which people relate to progress with the South, I think. So.
And in terms of lenses, do you just have one lens on the camera? Was it just a zoom lens, or were you using a prime? What were you using?
I went back and forth. I love the 50 prime just because it's I think that's the closest to human perspective. But I like the 24 to 105 just because you can get in there when you need to. And then also I think it's a 24 to 70 because you can shoot it at 2.8, which is also really awesome. But I use I shoot the eclipse in the film, and I use the 400 millimeter Canon lens for that. Okay. So, it's whatever it takes for whatever you're getting. It's yeah.
Same with you. Are you more of a prime lens person or zooms? What were you using there?
Actually, now at first I loved primes more, but now I don't. It doesn't really matter that much anymore. I kind of like zooms because you don't miss out that much. You're faster, and now I just spend time in the grading to get the look that I want. But I love zooms. That's like my favorite.
Okay, so
and I like the dramatic zooms.
Yeah, just pop in there.
Yeah,
boom.
That's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so
love that shit.
Just want to move on because I want to get both your second clips in. So, sorry if we're hopping about a bit, but can we now show Maceo's second clip? But first,
can I say something before you show the clip? So, what you're about to see is one of the most iconic moments in the film, and you're going to see this shot of Namibia sitting on. She's going to run up this staircase, and just to explain a little bit about that. So, in terms of storytelling, what I find is interesting is also repeating the same shot a couple times, but every time it being a little bit different. So this point in the film you see is the strongest moment in the film, and she's running up the staircase. Later parts in the film, you show her at the same place again, but she's sitting down, you know, looking into her hands at the same spot. So that's kind of like one of the purpose of just that shot, is a reoccurring shot, and every time it comes back, it has a different emotion to it. Okay. So, yeah. So now we go into the shot. Later in the movie, we move out of the shot. So those are some good things to think about. Like if you really want to, those movements symbolize a lot of emotion. So yeah, let's watch it.
Great. And so in that clip, I mean, particularly as you say, the iconic location, you were looking for something. You know, you're there's no close-ups in that. You're really conscious of putting her in that location, are you? And in that space, it's a, what was it? A boxing. It was a place. What was it? A boxing stadium.
Yeah, it's an old. It's actually not a boxing stadium, but it's an old like sports center arena kind of thing that's shut down. So we sneaked in.
Okay. Moving on, because I really do want to leave some time for people to ask you questions. Just coming back to you, Ramell. I mean, there is a link there. I think as you may have been able to see on the subtitles, there's a bit of a struggle narrative. That's her story, isn't it? That she's struggling to get recognition as a boxer. And I know you've in making the film Hale County, you've been quite keen to, in a way, move away from that struggle narrative in filming black people, in filming blackness, and you want to. You can speak about it far better than I can ask the question, I think. You want to move away from those preconceived notions of struggle and opposition to actually just looking at people's faces. Is that right? Talk a little bit about that, because I thought that, as I say, there's a bit of a link there with what Maceo was doing.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, the idea of struggle is obviously, you know, connected to being a human. It's like one of the most fundamental things that like allows life to evolve and persist, blah, 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 blah. But I think specifically as it relates to, you know, African-American lives and, you know, perhaps a lot of the views of those on the continent of Africa, there's a relationship between like media production and the sort of the trapping or the persistence of most narratives being couched in struggle. And what happens when you do that is that what else do you know? You know, like what else do you know about the person? What else do you know about the culture? What else do you know about their potential aside from this sort of constant fight against oppression, which traditionally isn't even used in those words. It's just like this sort of inevitable struggle that is just part of the way the world is. And so I was very interested in sort of resisting that in a narrative and to just participate in the life of someone who lives in one of these places. And, you know, how do you relate to someone if you don't have a story about them, you know?
And I think that's why I wanted to show the next clip. It's it's focusing more on Quincy, I think, this next clip. Let's just play the next clip and then you can talk a little, you know, respond to that. So the second of Ramell's clips, please. In that, do you feel that you were sort of letting things happen in front of the camera in that particular scene? It was evolving, you know. A guy comes on a horse from a long way away. Yeah. You're not directing any of that, obviously.
No. You know, the film very specifically is about, in one sense, you know, like being in a place long enough for, you know, the most imaginative or the most undirected moments to just unfold in front of you, and then to capture those from, you know, a really subjective point of view, to provide, you know, the participation in that reality, right? And so all of those moments are moments that, you know, just occurred while I was hanging out with my guys, and then you know, they're sort of edited together in you know, a sort of overly conceptual, but becomes fluid, you know, where you have a shadow throwing a ball to Quincy, and then Quincy putting on a helmet and looking to his left, and then a kid on the bike, then another girl on a bike at another place in time, to a guy on a horse, to a guy on the horse coming to you, and then him going to the right, and then the camera moving off to the right, and then it moving to the next scene, to the Hummer, and then the guy closing the door, and then the birds flying because of the noise of the birds, and then a guy, when someone gets hit in the head and they have birds going around their heads, then he's like doing this, and then it goes to fried chicken, and then it goes to, and so the entire film, in order to sort of double down on meaning and to sort of find a way to stitch together sort of 5 years of just relatively spontaneous moments, the form is one that's like stitched together with, all of these sort of interplays between.
I think you've called that associative editing. Is that right? That style?
Yeah. Well, it's I didn't make that. I mean, that's not me. That's like the language of cinema. But I think there's associative editing that is sort of intrinsically sort of amorphously poetic, and then there's associative editing that is conceptually associative, that is poetic in like a more concise meaning, but still provides like space for interpretation. There's like so many different ways to be associative.
Cool. Listen, I want to now take some questions, and I can see a hand up there already. So we'll take a question there. If you've got another question for Ramell or Maceo, or reflections on the your style of filmmaking, please do contribute. So one there, and I think then there's a gentleman there. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say thank you. Beautifully crafted images. I can see the work of putting an image, sound, and content together. Really nice to look at. And I would like to know, when you just said associative editing, does that mean, when do you start, do you have a camera concept? And if yes, do you develop that before you make the film? Do you alter it when you're in the shooting? How does it work?
When you say, a camera concept, do you mean a script?
Yeah, something that, right, a concept where you say, okay, I want to have this kind of look, and it's slow and motion, I want to focus on motion. Do you have that kind of concept before you set out?
Ramell, do you want to speak to that first, and then Maceo?
Well, I mean, you look at like a filmmaker like Wes Anderson, and then he has like a very specific aesthetic that he's developed over time, but his early films didn't reflect that, I imagine that he knew that he wanted to make films, and then maybe he found a more specific voice that he wanted to do later. I think it literally varies per project. My film specifically, the ideas behind it and the way in which it was stitched together, the way in which it was put together came 3 months into the project. It didn't start off that way. It was more in response to the failure of the project to like be satisfying to myself. And so I imagine that it literally varies. There's no, and everyone knows that makes stuff. If you end up with what you started with, then it's pretty awful. I mean, not awful, gosh, that's so cruel. It's not the best thing.
And was that your experience as well? Did the film change over time?
Definitely. So the first month that I filmed, and when we edited it, we were like, wow, okay, all the shots are super wide. So it's not sometimes that easy to cut to because we don't have any variation. The next time we're like, you want the camera to move a lot. Like it's going to be dancing just like the music you hear walking around the streets of Cuba. The third time we're like, shit, the camera's moving a little bit too much. So all those things came into account, and that's what I love, doing films through time. You have time to to rest, look at it and learn from what you've been doing. Now I feel that like we came to a point where we were really intuitive. So we're like, okay, wow, okay, Namibia's talking to her friend about her childhood and about this. Okay, let's shoot it this way. And let's, you change depending on what the emotion. And just like in the clip that you guys saw when she's in the stadium, that's like the most grand and epic location. Okay, let's shoot it really far out to show like she's taking up all this space.
So you're responding as you're going along.
To what the story is, and it's like, for instance, just as you said, okay, this scene may be more emotional. Okay, then you shoot it this way, So it's, to me, it's a little bit about what the emotional, charge is in the moment and what's being said at the scene, and then you find those small,
Okay.
And can I say one more thing? Really quick.
Just quick. Yeah.
Also, so there's like, there's films that are made at like the, ethnography lab, the Century Ethnography Lab at Harvard that are just like one shot for like an hour and a half, right? And so they don't have to edit that. But the content is surprising them. And so that's where the surprise is. And so they started off with a framework, and then the film emerges through this time-based sort of indexical thing. But every single film is made in some sense in the editing room, regardless. So
100%. Yeah,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got a question there. The mic, I will hand up, and then we will take one last question from the person right at the back.
I've not seen either of your films, so I might be extrapolating quite a bit here. But from the clips and what you said about them, it seems like they're very rooted in a sense of place, and how the environment of the characters both defines and potentially oppresses them. So I was just wondering what kind of visual decisions you may have made in trying to introduce their environment as a character.
Gosh.
And an influence on and how you did that.
That's a big question, actually. Who'd like to have a go at that? I mean, the environments are the specific place of Hale County and Havana, Cuba. Maybe as a couple of quick lines, I think, and it may be something to pick up on afterwards. But what would you say to that? Well, how is Hale County the character? It is the character, isn't it?
Well, the film is literally about the place, and so if you use the camera in the way in which I think I use the camera, which is to express like very specifically your way of seeing the world, and not like, oh, this flower is beautiful, but more like when you look at something, you're choosing to look at something and not look at something else. And then if there are people in that moment and you're focusing on certain elements of that, then it speaks to your personality and your visual interest. And so as a sort of African American, quote unquote, going to the historic South, the conceptual home of the African American, the conceptual home of the Black image, it becomes loaded. The act of looking is historicized immediately. And also, obviously, then the historic South itself becomes, part of this like grand historical present, in which, it's like the home of the African diaspora. And so all of these things are loaded in the way in which I'm looking with the camera and I'm interacting with the characters, and how the characters are also part of that history. And then that becomes the sort of underpinnings of the film, but simultaneously you're just sort of allowed to be there and look. So it's this sort of thing.
Okay. Maceo, I mean, you spoke before about the colours and the textures of Havana. I mean, the film is about a person, but it is also about Cuba, isn't it?
It's definitely, we wanted to like paint the world that she sees, and also the scenes that we saw when we walked around there. And just to answer your question a little bit of how to show this, is like when you walk around this place, like you see all these details. You see, like especially in Cuba, you see communist, paintings and imagery everywhere. So that's one of the recurring things that you'll notice also in the film. There's these huge paintings with these provocative quotes, like it's like socialism or death, so that's one of the things that you see a lot in the film, and I think that's how we kind of sneaked in, what the environment can say so much by just looking,
Exactly. So I said I'd take the last question at the back, and then we'll have to finish, I'm afraid. So
for your panel today, it was very interesting. My question is a hypothetical one. If there were no more rental houses and you guys had to pay for a camera with your own funds, could you please tell me which camera you would buy, and if you had to choose maybe 4 or 5 lenses, what type of lenses and why? Thank you very much.
Okay,
great.
So
I put up my iPhone as a way of showing you that you could just make a film with that. I bought all my own stuff. The camera costs like $4,000. You just save up money and you buy it. I shot my film for 5 years. I did the film by myself for the first 3. And so, you just go buy a cheap camera and you go make your film. And then once you have material, and people will start investing in it if they like it. And doesn't mean it's good if they don't like, or if they like it, doesn't mean it's bad if they don't. But Just buy a Canon.
This is just a fun thing. So I remember being 16. I was 16, I was looking at the cinema, I was like, how do you make it look like it looks in the cinema? And then you embark on this journey. It's like, what lens did you use? What lens did you use? You send all these emails to people and they're not replying you. And you spend some time, if you start slowly like figuring out how to make things look good. And now I'm like, you know, at the point where I'm like, damn, it just looks so good with the iPhone. It's like, it just feels so real, you know what I mean? So I think, like, just enjoy that process, trying to figure all those stuff out. I would probably... I was going to say Blackmagic, but then you said the phone. I was like, damn, man, you know. The phone, I think it's the most...
The 4K.
Yeah.
But also,
this is quite bad for Canon's business model if everybody's just going to film on phones, I think. But so that Matthew doesn't get too depressed, I think, just to remind people where you're going to be for the next 3 days. Sorry, the mic's at the front.
So yeah, Cutler's Hall.
And what are we going to see there apart from phones?
Well, hopefully not too many phones on tripods. But yes, there should be a range of cinema cameras and a few other bits and pieces and some DSLRs and stuff. We've got a team there for basically 3 days. I'll be there for most of the time. So any kind of questions you want to ask or a kit you want to play with, then we'll be in there and come say hi.
Can I say one thing?
Hey, you always want to say one more thing. Go on.
It's true.
Let the man speak.
Go for it.
You know, content's more important than form is slave to content. And form is content, but worry about the content first, and let the aesthetics speak to the content and reflect or elevate that. Don't like start with, you know, oh my God, I'm going to shoot this 4K with this incredible Canon, and now all of a sudden my film, like, who cares? Like, no one cares. Yeah, basically.
Or do that until you realize that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because that happens.
And that will happen.
It will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great way to end it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
So,
cheers, guys.
Cheers.
We've all been there, right?